Thank you, Brian, and thank you to the Silicon Valley Leadership Group and to Carl for allowing me to be here today and Waymo to sponsor today's events. I have the distinct honor of introducing San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo, but before I do, I want to take just a moment to talk a little bit about Waymo and why we as a company felt it was important to sponsor this particular event of the leadership groups on regional competitiveness. So as you may know already, Waymo was originally started as the Google self-driving car project about 10 years ago. Our very first rides were on the streets of California and in the Silicon Valley. Last year, we became our own company with the goal of developing fully self-driving technology that will allow people to get from point A to point B at the push of a button, no hands on the wheel. We're very excited about the promise of bringing our technology to people in places all around the country, but first here in the Silicon Valley. As you may have heard, it's one of our goals to launch a service right here in the Silicon Valley in the near term. We're moving closer to that goal all of the time, and that's really because of the support of California cities, and especially in our home of the Silicon Valley, and our ability to test on public roads here, that we're getting closer to what we believe is bringing life-saving technology to reality. So I'm pleased to introduce Mayor Liccardo, someone who I consider a friend, and he's a leader to our community who's tirelessly looking for ways to bring innovation to San Jose in a way that will serve his community. So whether it's through his commitment to address our housing crisis with the commitment to bring 25,000 new housing units to the city over the next 5 years, or his effort to make coding accessible to 5,000 San Jose kids through his Coding 5K challenge, Mayor Sam Liccardo is pushing boundaries just as one would expect a Silicon Valley mayor to do. This past summer, the Mayor's Office of Innovation and the San Jose Department of Transportation put out a request for proposals directed towards AV companies like ours, inviting them to pilot their technology in San Jose. And I just want to say that the thoughtfulness with which the city's request was prepared, their desire to partner with the private sector, and their demonstration of having a really clear understanding of where the AV industry is right now is I think it's an excellent example of why San Jose, under the leadership of Mayor Liccardo, is going to continue to be at the forefront of innovation in America. So please help me welcome to the stage San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to be with you. I wanted to talk about one word that is particularly important, I think, in transportation planning that we don't spend much time talking about. And that word is proximity. To paraphrase Mark Twain, one might say that proximity breeds contempt and children, but it also breeds solutions, I believe, to the most pressing challenges of our valley, not least of which, of course, are traffic, the lack of affordable housing, and for our world, climate change. And so I want to talk about proximity because often in conversation about transportation, we spend a lot of time talking about projects and programs, in some cases about autonomous vehicles. I'm grateful for what Waymo and many other innovative companies are doing in that space. And I spend a lot of time responding to transportation questions in the context of what it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. A CEO will come to me and say, we've got an awful transportation mess. What would it take to get me a light rail stop, or a BART station, or a freeway off-ramp, or something? And of course, we all know it's not cheap. Or occasionally, since I'm chair of the VTA board this year, inevitably some city may come along and say, gee, we got all this development now, aren't you going to build something to accommodate that? And of course, we've got a little challenge in that we have a small deficit or a large one. Thank you, Jeannie, for your efforts helping us resolve that. And frankly, the dollars are going to continue to be scarce for a long time. And so it seems to me that the focus on what we build and how we build it is really important, and I'm really grateful for the incredible work the SVLG does and continues to do, and boy, do we need that and more. But I think we need to shift the conversation a bit in the shorter term. And the reason why we need to shift is because, as I mentioned, it's not cheap to build stuff. In this state, it's about $10 million a mile for a freeway, about $420,000 a mile for a typical road. And if you're building BART into Berryessa, for example, about $230 million a mile. And by the way, that's under budget, $150 million. Thank goodness to the good work of ETA. But it's not cheap, no matter how it gets built. And of course, it always takes too long. We know these projects are the work of a generation. I know that too well because I first met Carl Guardino when I worked on a ballot measure that was going to bring BART to Santa Clara County 18 years ago. So we've got a lot of work to do if we think it's all going to happen just with projects and programs. Rather, I think proximity is a better guidepost for us, particularly as we're thinking about how we build at a time when there's so much growth in our valley. I believe we should reimagine transportation planning, not on moving people to destinations, but on moving destinations to where people are. And I think we can do it if we think more creatively about the fundamental challenge of our valley. And I think we're all familiar with it every morning when we get on those parking lots, camouflage as freeways, known as 101, 280, 87, 85, et cetera. There is a distinct flow to traffic we noticed in this region. People head to the west and to the north in the mornings and the opposite directions in the evenings. It is not a secret. Housing is located in one part of our valley. Jobs are located elsewhere, predominantly, of course. This is not uniformly true. But that has created the incredible challenges we have. And those challenges, that is the separation between housing and jobs, creates winners and losers throughout our valley. But I think it's fair to say all of us are losers to the extent that we're stuck on the same freeways. So I was hoping, Brian, if you could advance the slides. I think if we'll talk a bit about how it is we got to that spot, or maybe not. There we go. So this is particularly important to the mayors and council members in the room because we all think about our budgets, and budgets matter a lot. And one of the key drivers of budgets is what we call jobs per employed resident. This is sort of one of those long-term drivers of fiscal health in a city. And it's not a secret that I'm being a bit parochial here as the mayor of the city of San Jose, so I'll be parochial for a moment. We've got lots of residents and not many jobs for those employed residents. In fact, typically what we consider a balanced city is about 100 employed residents for every 100 jobs. That ratio, actually it's inverted, I should say. It's 100 jobs for every 100 employed residents, is a better way to describe it. That ratio of 1 to 1 is what we would call a balanced jobs to employed resident ratio, and that would enable a city to be both fiscally healthy and enable there to be enough destinations near where people live to actually accommodate without, of course, a tremendous demand regionally on the roadways. That is not the picture for the most part in our valley. San Jose has a unique distinction of being the only major city in the entire United States that has a smaller daytime population than nighttime population. What does that mean? We are a bedroom community for the rest of a valley that is very prosperous, and for good reason. There are great companies and wonderful cities to our north and our west where those companies have tended to migrate, and that is certainly a great thing for our valley in many ways. The problem is that there are incentives for this state of affairs to remain just as it is, the status quo. And if we could go to the next slide, this is some view of what exactly happens in terms of tax revenue per capita. This is property tax, and maybe we can go to the next slide. This is sales tax, a pretty similar story. When you have relatively small cities with lots of jobs, that is a great thing for the bottom line of the city. I think we'd all agree. And I am, of course, again, speaking wholly parochially, with a great envy of those wonderful cities to our west and our north who are running surpluses. Nonetheless, that does create an incentive, I believe, ultimately for parochial planning. That is the fiscalization of land use, which exacerbates this separation of jobs and housing and continues to perpetuate our misery on the freeways. And so there are, I think quite fortunately, very good examples and people in this room who can stand up and say that their cities are working hard to reverse this in various ways. The Mountain View recently stepped up in a big way on a plan to build 10,000 homes near the Bay Shore, and we're grateful for that. Thank you, John. I know the Lawrence Station area plan in Santa Clara, another great example of how we can build housing in some of our very jobs-heavy areas, in that case, Sunnyvale. But there are plenty of examples where the contrary is true, and we know those pretty well. We know that from the day that the Apple campus was announced, for the next 5 years, the city of Cupertino did not add a single unit of housing. That is a problem for a 3 million square foot campus, and there are plenty more examples. And so the challenge for us is, thank you so much, Carl. It's very kind. So the challenge for us, of course, is figuring out how we can create incentives regionally for all of us to create a plan for proximity, not just for projects and programs, but for proximity of actually getting housing and jobs together. It is something of a prisoner's dilemma, as you can see, for any typical civic leader. Obviously, we all are elected by our own residents in our own cities, and we have an obligation to provide them with police and fire and roads and the basic necessities. And there's nothing, it's very difficult to blame any individual leader in any city for saying we want to continue to perpetuate a system that ensures that we have a healthy budget. That's a good thing. But of course, we know, as with all prisoners' dilemmas, you can act in a parochial interest, which may be good for you, but for a larger region, it makes us all suffer together. And that is certainly the employers in their cities certainly suffer to the extent they cannot get their employees to work in 90 minutes or less in many cases. And certainly their own residents suffer to the extent they can't afford to live in this very expensive valley. So we need to think and rethink how we can incentivize cities to, in fact, bring proximity to their own towns. That is, bringing housing to where the jobs are. And there are some folks talking, I guess to borrow the lingo of our president, some people are saying that there are ways to prod cities, good and bad. We can all think of carrots and sticks. I'd like to suggest one for us to consider as a region. And it's something that I, not fully baked, don't pretend to know all the answers. I expect this will be part, I think, of a robust conversation over the next year or two. I'd like to see how we can set a regional standard for deciding what responsible development looks like. For those cities that want to grow and want to add jobs capacity, they should do so. And they should build housing that meets the demand created by that job capacity. So should Santa Clara choose to add 9.5 million square feet at City Place, for example, it might want to build the housing that would actually accommodate 17,900 workers that will be working there. If they can do so within their borders, fantastic. If they can't, let's rethink this. Now, how exactly do we do such a thing? Well, we could imagine looking at the imbalance and deciding how we might use these same incentives to encourage cities to do the right thing. Transportation dollars flow regionally here. They flow from Metropolitan Transportation Commission and from the VTA. How can we condition transportation dollars that actually incentivize cities that want to build the housing within their borders, and perhaps restrain that same funding, that is, reduce that funding from those cities that choose to grow differently? How might we, in fact, exact fees on cities that would encourage them to build housing next to the jobs, and where they choose not to build the housing, to pay fees that other cities could use for transportation and for affordable housing? This would be a remarkable departure from something that all local officials will swear by, as much as, well, as Charlton Heston would by the Second Amendment. That is local control. We will lose local control out of our dead cold fingers after our death. But that is the only way we'll do it as local officials. And the question is, can we get beyond local control to regional thinking, I think this is something we can do collaboratively. It doesn't have to be an us versus them. This is something in which we all have a stake. Small towns and the big cities, because we're all stuck in the same traffic and we're all stuck with a housing crisis in this valley that makes it unaffordable for people at all income levels. So I would like to encourage us to begin to think regionally about how we can incentivize cities to think as our residents do, not by city limits, but by the realities of traffic and housing that we confront every day. And I look forward to that conversation with each of you. Thank you.